Hello watch enthusiasts! To lovers and enthusiasts, Seiko is as marvellous as it is peculiar, with strangely ill-organised ranges, uniquely scratch-prone but beautifully made lacquered bezels, and bafflingly high quality from their hands to their case finishing. However, Seiko is going through a period of major upheaval, and as we've seen in the last few months, Seiko has radically redesigned its approach towards marketing, with standardisation across the range in terms of design and in terms of branding, and with increased prices. In today's video, I would like to examine this change with a few watches which have been released recently, and explain why this represents a potentially questionable direction for a brand with quite as much potential as Seiko, rather than being a factor in improving their existing issues. However, before I begin the video, I would like to encourage you to like, share and subscribe if you enjoy the video or find the content interesting. Also, do follow me on Instagram at the address which is now on the screen to see additional content which you wouldn't normally find here on the YouTube channel to really enhance the experience of being able to watch the channel and also see other content alongside it. Naturally, every brand has a duty to develop to have the greatest possible revenue from its respective market, and brands such as Rolex or Patek Philippe demonstrate just how lucrative such optimization can be with a truly unmatched series of advertising campaigns. Of course, these vary between the two of these brands, but the end goal is the same in terms of sales and creating a particular image. However, for some brands, the characteristics which we appreciate are far less tangible than a slick advertising campaign or even an iconic design. In the case of Seiko, it is the blend of value and a uniquely Japanese pragmatic approach to form, function, and the eccentricity when a dive watch is embellished with exquisite finishing to produce something which is not necessarily the obvious choice, but nonetheless works wonderfully in terms of its functionality, while still being an object which has a certain artistic side to it. And the beauty of Seiko was that they offered a product which didn't compete directly with European options for the same price, simply because the approach to the product was so radically different. Of course, the increase in the price of Seiko watches comes as no surprise, and frankly is no issue to be lamented, as watch prices rise across the board. The reasons for this change are broad and varied, but do mean that we have to accept Seikos as excellent options against comparable watches from other brands, rather than being able to undercut them. And considering the quality of these watches, I doubt this will be an issue, especially as they adopt ceramic bezels and more impressive technical solutions with every model they release. But this will change the way we look at Seiko models in their range, and certainly models like the Sumo, for example, have changed position from something which was affordable and something a little bit more impressive than, for example, a Turtle, in something which is far more sought after. However, this does not mean that Seiko doesn't have a pricing issue. As has been seen over the last few years, Seiko has struggled to separate its more affordable pieces from more advanced models, and this has been seen in the split of branding between Seiko and Grand Seiko, as we saw in 2017, which left many existing Grand Seiko dials looking a fraction bare. Yet this change seems rather strange when only a couple of years later, Seiko watches have started to encroach very seriously on the price of Grand Seiko, with pieces exceeding £5,000, whilst also pushing squarely into the market which Omega has itself struggled to reclaim from the almighty dominance of Rolex. To further complicate the problem, Seiko has now extended its Prospex line from, as the name would suggest, purely premium professional grade tool watches to watches costing from a few £100s in the case of the Turtle, to pieces worth several £1,000s with the trio of luxury sports watches released at Baselworld 2019. This leaves a situation where, ironically, it becomes more difficult to justify the price of the more premium options for a casual buyer. For me, the most pressing issue is the new direction which Seiko is taking to appeal to a very different audience. For a fair while, Seiko has been very reluctant to offer its choicest of models, in effect the Japanese domestic models, to a widespread audience, thus clipping their wings as a choice for a casual buyer. In response, it seems that Seiko has effected a U-turn by offering a much more even spread of models, but also by trying to appeal to a more mainstream look. To illustrate this point, we have to look at the hallmarks of each luxury brand, the hallmarks of design and indeed those of continuity. For Rolex, it's the oyster case and the immensely conservative design aesthetic which runs throughout their range. For Omega, it's the lyre twisted style lugs and the font used for Speedmaster or Seamaster. Unfortunately, Seiko appears to me to have been too keen to turn away from their rich design heritage to be able to give the casual buyer an incentive to invest, because of the long-term effect of this lack of originality in a large number of their models. Now I will state this doesn't apply to Grand Seiko, which really is trying, for the most part, to have a very different style. But one does have to recognise that in the case of their most recent two-tone spring drive GMT, this does provide a good example of this problem, because it provides an answer to the Rolex GMT Master 2, but not by offering an alternative solution to this market, but by offering a GMT Master 2 by Grand Seiko instead of Rolex, which doesn't strike me as a very wise option in terms of creating a collector's market for these watches. The irony of this issue is that Seiko is arguably the most important watch brand of the 20th century, as it revolutionised the very meaning of accuracy with the quartz Astron of 1969, and it even made it into space with one of the first automatic chronographs, the 6138, amongst other innovations such as spring drive, able to derive from an essentially mechanical movement an incredible level of accuracy. In addition, their watches were also involved in the creation of the monoblock case for dive watches with the 6159, whilst the 6105 was able to appear in the iconic Vietnam War film Apocalypse Now. In spite of this, Seiko fails to tell these stories, which are themselves perpetuated by enthusiasts rather than by any marketing. Even with the re-edition models produced by Seiko of their 62 MAS, 6159 and 6105 dive watches released over the last 3 years, the market appears to be little broader than those already attached to the brand. In this context, it seems regrettable that Seiko should deviate from producing watches which tell the brand's story, whilst instead focusing on watches which appeal to the ways of its competitors in an attempt to appeal to a market rather than attempting to create one of their own. Furthermore, Seiko runs the risk of devaluing itself by losing its specific character, especially when it's loved for historically having a Saab-like stubborn streak when creating tools made to the very best standards, even at a modest price range, such as one has seen with the SKX 007 and 009 models. By making such small lines of seemingly unchanging watches, they've enabled these pieces to become as timeless as the Rolex Submariner in their own particular segment, specifically because they don't appeal to the whims of the public. Instead, these watches command a cult following as people latch on to specific models for their aesthetics and their design, and seek out models which Seiko obstinately will only sell outside their particular market, and thus creating a certain demand and a collectability behind pieces. By contrast, the SKX has recently been replaced by a new Seiko 5, which adopts the SKX case as it follows in the footsteps of the dive watch appearance of early Seiko 5 watches, but provides a selection of colourful but potentially short-lived aesthetic variants in response to trends rather than creating new ones. These designs compromise function in favour of form, yet fail to recognise that a true classic needs to be as relevant tomorrow as it is today for endured interest from the public. And the fact that this watch has a halved water resistance of only 100 metres and no screw-down crown, I must admit, doesn't help its case either. And so as a result, we're at a very real crossroads with Seiko as they choose where to go next. But as always with my more essay-like videos, I would be interested to hear your opinion on this matter in the comments down below, which is a matter which was raised specifically by an individual viewer who asked for this particular subject to be discussed, and I must say I thought it was rather an interesting direction to go down. So I'd be very interested to hear what you think about this particular point. I will therefore conclude the video here, but I would very much like to encourage you to like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to see more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, out.